Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you guys how I bank yeast. I currently have a washed Conan yeast from my heady topper that I brewed last week. It's been sitting washed for about a week and a half now. Basically, washing process is pretty simple. You just take the yeast from the carboy and you put some clean water in there. I boil water and boil my mason jars and just keep some of the water. Get the yeast in suspension, pour it in the mason jars, let it settle, pour the yeast off, leave the hops behind, and then let it sit. And you can do that again for as many times as you want until you're pretty comfortable. So as you can see, it's pretty much all yeast in that one. And then there's another one I had to see if I can catch anything else. There's a little bit of yeast. So I don't know if you can tell, but there's definitely a different color. You can see the yeast on top. That's all hops on the bottom. So big difference in the two. So basically I'm going to harvest some of the yeast out of there, and I'm going to put it into vials like that. And what those vials are going to do, they're going to hold that with some glycerin. I use a basic vegetable glycerin. That way it's food grade and everything. So what the glycerin does is it prevents the yeast cells from breaking when they thaw, because what's going to happen is I'm going to freeze them so that way I can hold them longer, and then when you go to thaw them, the cell will break if it freezes, because the cell is made of water. So the yeast will absorb the glycerin, and the glycerin will prevent any of the ice crystals from breaking the yeast membrane. So basically what you need to do this, I will show you right now. So what you're looking at, these are obviously just caps. You need some kind of vials. These are 15 milliliter vials. You need your yeast. I just use this to kind of hold these when they go into the pressure cooker. This is just basically to extract the glycerin. You can do that any way you want. You don't really need to use a pipette. But the glycerin's important. You definitely need some kind of glycerin. I got this on Amazon for about $4, so it's pretty cheap. And I will probably never use all of this. You're going to need a pressure cooker. So I just use this one here, a little bit of water in it. And obviously you are going to need some kind of Star San to kind of keep everything sanitary. So the biggest things you'll find with yeast banking is you need to be extremely sanitary. So normally when we brew, we sanitize. In yeast banking, you have to sterilize. So that's what I'm doing with the pressure cooker. The pressure cooker basically will act as a autoclave. And what an autoclave is basically just steam inside of a container that's going to get the pressure up, which then gets the temperature up too. So what it does is it kills bacteria, because when you boil, there's still some microbes that survive. So what the autoclave will basically do is it'll kill all that. The reason being is when you are harvesting this yeast, you got these little vials. You're not getting much yeast. And when you do this, you've got a very limited amount of wiggle room to have anything go wrong. So the last thing you want is to store your yeast, then you go to brew and you're ready to pitch the yeast and it's dead, or you got a mutated version of the yeast. So you want to try to be as sanitary as possible, and just kind of making sure everything's clean and sterile. So I'll show you the process as I go, and then if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. So basically what I'm doing now is I'm just using this pipette to get some of the glycerin. This stuff's very thick. It's not like water. So basically what we're doing is just putting about 30% of the vials we're going to use as glycerin. And this is a pure glycerin. Some say to add water. What I actually do is I still have some liquid left in the yeast after I drained it off. That's some of the beer. What I might do today, we'll see if I decide to go this route, but I might use some of the distilled water I have and put a little distilled water in this. You're supposed to put some liquid because the cells are made of water, so you want to give them kind of their natural water. So what I'm going to do is just kind of fill these up, about 30% full of glycerin. It's probably about 1 to 2 milliliters worth. These pipettes are 2 milliliters, but as you can see when I'm pouring, you don't get all of it out. When this heats up, this will become a lot more smooth and won't be as thick. So that's what I do here. Then I'll put them inside of that, and then I will drop it into the pressure cooker. So I'll update you as we go. So now I'm just going to add a little bit of water to each one. Not much, probably about 10% of what's in there. I'm going to add just about that much more water. So not much, you can see the separation. Not doing too much water. You want majority of this to be the yeast. You don't want a lot of it to be the glycerin in the water. Again, you don't have much room for wiggle room with the yeast, so you want to make sure that you can get as much of the actual yeast as you can. So what I did here is I'm using distilled water. I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to that. It's just what I'm using. There probably is no benefit to distilled over regular. When this autoclaves in the pressure cooker, all of the bacteria is going to be dead anyway. The reason you put the water and the glycerin in first is you do want to kill whatever's in the glycerin in the water. You don't really want to get any of that in there, so that's why I'm doing this. Alright. Ouch. Back. So you do want these capped inside of the autoclave. What I do is I just leave it just slightly loose, and I put them standing up inside of this. Don't really know if they have to be stood up. Any video I've watched, they've been stood up. It makes sense so that way the glycerin doesn't come out. And what will happen is when the pressure cooker, when I depressurize it, all of the steam in the air will come down to the water. So this couple, you'll actually see this couple fill up with some water from the steam. So I just keep them stood up just to prevent them from, emptying out or anything getting in them. So what will happen is when the pressure cooker is going, it will heat up everything in the, like an autoclave, and it will heat up the glycerin and the water, and hopefully kill all the bacteria. Alright, so everything's in. There's some water in there. Caps are on loose, filled with glycerin and some distilled water. This is a turkey baster that I use. There is lab pipettes you can use too. But basically I use a stainless steel turkey baster, that way I can autoclave it. And what I'll do is, since this is rubber and I can't really autoclave this because it'll melt, or I would think it would, what I do is I sanitize this with some Star San and just make sure that I don't take any of the yeast up into this. So I'll take these apart. This has a nice little end to it, so what I can do is be very fine getting into there. The bigger side really wouldn't fit into the vials as nice, so that's why I have that. So I'll put this all in there, and I'll have this steam for about about 20 minutes. I'll have them steam. You can also boil. You don't need to have a pressure cooker and an autoclave, but basically, as I said before, when you boil, there is still some microbes that will survive. So autoclaving will kill everything, and this will be completely sterilized in 20 minutes. Okay, for you guys that may not know what a pressure cooker looks like when it's running, this is what it looks like. So you'll usually see the thing on the top start spinning. That's how you know that the pressure is at the right pressure. I think this one holds up to 15 psi. And then basically what I'll do is I'll turn the temperature down. There's no reason to have this at full blast when it does get to this point because it's pressurized. So what I'll do now is I'll set my timer to 20 minutes. And when that's done, what I'll do is I'll take it off the heat. One thing I can tell you guys is make sure when you're using the pressure cooker, do not take the lid off before all the pressure's gone by itself. Don't force the pressure out. Don't push things down. That is how you know there's pressure in it. When that little silver thing is up, there's pressure inside. Make sure you're not depressing that or taking the top off, because this will instantly boil. Basically what will happen is once that pressure can escape, all the water in there will boil away. So what you do is take this off the heat and do not take the lid off until all the pressure's gone and that valve is down. When that valve is down, then you can take everything off. Alright, so I'll check back in when the boil's done. Okay, so the 20 minutes is done. So what we're going to do is just move this off the heat. So as you can tell, it's off the heat now, so the pressure's going to stop. It's going to come down. So once that little dot goes down, I will take everything out and I will let it cool, because you don't want the liquids to be hot. The glycerin gets very, very hot, so I'm not going to let the yeast go into that until it's cooler. Okay, so I just took everything out of the pressure cooker. Got the baster sanitized with its piece down there. Got all my glycerin ready to go. So as you can see, it got pretty hot. This is very, very fluid now. You can see the difference between the water and the glycerin, but this is extremely hot right now. So what I'm doing is I took the caps off to let these cool a little quicker. This paper towel is soaked in Star San. So basically everything from here on out needs to be extremely sanitary. Everything you could do needs to be sanitary. So I completely drenched this with Star San, kept everything in there to keep it sanitized, so nothing can touch anything as of right now. And then what I'll do is I'll sanitize the inside of this, and then I will get ready to transfer. Alright, so everything's cooled down now, so now we're going to try to get some of the yeast into the vials. So let's get started. So I like to shoot it right into the glycerin. Get it nice and filled. So that's basically what I'll do. So let me finish filling these and I'll check back in. Alright, so now that they're all filled, so basically what I'll do, I'll just shake them up real good, so that way we can get the glycerin all nice and mixed up with the yeast. Keep them nice and tight, so as you can see, a little separation before you shake it up, but you shake them up real good, get the yeast in there. So what I'll do is I'll put these in the fridge for about 24 hours, and then what that'll do is it'll get the yeast ready to get for the freezing temperatures. You don't want to introduce them to it too quick, or else they will die. So what we'll do is I'll put this in the fridge. You might get some separation, which is fine. I just shake them up again before I put them in the freezer. So then once they go into the freezer, they're going to look like this. So what we do is I get this cooler, and I load it up with ice packs. So as you can see, this was the conan yeast before I brewed. So when I did the original starter, it's right there. So it is frozen solid, see? So basically the brown is the dead stuff, and the clears, the white stuff, is going to be your living yeast. So you do get some death. It's not exactly foolproof, but that's okay. So then what I'll do is when I want to use these, I'll thaw them out in the fridge and then pitch them into a starter. Very small starter. You want to definitely step up when you do this. So you step up from really small, maybe like a 100 milliliter starter. So this is actually another yeast right here. This is a yeast my buddy gave me. It's a Saison yeast with some Brett in it. So I'm kind of interested to see how this turns out with the Brett in it. But as you can see, there's not as much death in these, so I think I did a little better job with these. So we'll see. This was the original Conan, but obviously if we find out that they are dead and there's really not much there, we can always dispose of these because we now have 7 more. So key thing when you use your cooler, make sure you're putting it into a cooler. Don't just stick it in the freezer. I have a chest freezer over there. All the food's out because I had to get this from the bottom. You don't want to leave them in the freezer because the freezer does have a defrost cycle. You don't want to have the vials thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing. So what I do is I have ice packs in there and then the yeast. So that way what's basically happening is the ice packs prevent the yeast from really getting that defrost cycle. So that's what I do. Most people do this that I've seen online. So I would definitely recommend having the ice packs. And then just make sure when you go to use them again, you do a starter. I would probably start from something really small. I'm talking maybe a 100 milliliter starter with like a 1.020 gravity, and then kind of step it up by maybe 100 milliliters each time with a little bit more gravity until you can get to the full 1040. Just make sure it smells right. If anything smells off, maybe taste it. If it doesn't taste or smell the way it should, then obviously the yeast was not a successful bank. So it sometimes doesn't work, sometimes it does. I've yet to actually do a starter. When I do one, I will post it. But yeah, just look it up online. That's how I learned all this. Really nothing more than just doing your research. So if you have any questions, post them down below. I'll answer. I'll get to them as soon as I see them. And I will definitely make sure I post when I go to thaw these and use them again. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe and like.